Let me ask you something honestly, as if it were just the two of us in the room. Have you ever stopped to think about the real risk involved in oral sex? Many people still think that it's not real sex, that it's safe, that there's no danger. But I need to tell you this clearly and directly, as I tell my own patients. Oral sex can transmit the same diseases as penetrative sex, and sometimes even more. And the most concerning thing isn't just the infections themselves, but the fact that most of them don't show any symptoms at first. The person gets infected, feels nothing, sees nothing, and only finds out years later. Sometimes when the disease has already caused serious damage or even progressed to something malignant. That's why I want you to stay with me until the end of this conversation. Today I will explain to you, one by one, the real risks that almost no one talks about, what science has already proven, and most importantly, what you need to do to truly protect yourself. I am Dr. Marina Volkova, a medical specialist in sexual and urological health, and my work has always been exactly this: to explain simply what medicine tends to complicate, especially when the topic involves risks that no one likes to discuss. And since we are speaking with so much transparency today, I want to ask you one thing. Tell me below if you think this topic is important. If yes, write in the comments. Great topic. Now, if you think there is another subject related to intimate health that you would like me to address, then tell me as well. Your opinion helps decide the next videos, and the goal here is always to answer exactly what you need to know. So let's start with something simple, but that almost no one considers. Your mouth, mine, anyone's, is one of the environments in the human body most filled with microorganisms. When I say full, it's not an exaggeration. We are talking about hundreds of different species living there at the same time, coexisting in balance, each fulfilling a role. This, in daily life, is not a problem, but when there is direct contact of the mouth with the urethra, with the penis, with the vulva, or with the anus, this balance completely changes. What is in the mouth, and should stay only in the mouth, migrates to regions that should be sterile. And then problems begin. This simple change of environment allows natural bacteria from saliva to enter sensitive tissues, cause inflammation, irritation, and even infections that many people don't even imagine are related to oral sex. And I need you to understand this foundation well, because everything that follows stems exactly from this. Oral sex is not clean, not harmless, and not safer just because there is no penetration. The risk exists precisely because of this silent transfer of microorganisms. Now that you understand the basics, let me explain one of the most overlooked risks, and at the same time, one of the most dangerous: HPV. Many people associate HPV only with cervical cancer or genital warts, but what almost no one realizes is that this virus can infect the mouth with extreme ease. And when I say ease, I really mean ease. Just a single oral contact with an infected person. And the most concerning thing is the following. HPV does not need to leave a visible lesion to establish itself. It can enter, stay there, quiet, silent, and only cause problems years later. And yes, it can infect regions you would never imagine: throat, tongue, tonsils, the entire oral cavity. Today we have very solid data showing that certain types of oropharyngeal cancer, those tumors at the base of the tongue and in the tonsil region, are increasingly linked to HPV transmitted through oral sex. In some groups of men, the risk already surpasses the risk of cervical cancer in women. And do you know what the most insidious detail is? The patient looks at a small sore in the mouth and thinks it's just a canker sore. But it can very well be a lesion caused by the virus. And even when there is no lesion at all, it continues to transmit. That's why I usually tell all my patients, when we talk about HPV, the greatest danger is not just catching the virus, it's not realizing that you've caught it. Following this line, there's another thing I need you to understand with complete clarity: herpes. And here, it doesn't matter if it's type 1 or type 2, Both can cause more damage than people imagine when it comes to oral sex. Type 1 herpes, the one with the sores on the lip, is very common. But what many patients don't know is that it can descend to the genital area during oral sex. And the opposite also happens. Those with genital herpes can transmit the virus to their partner's mouth. And do you know what the main problem is? Herpes doesn't go away. It remains dormant in the body, hidden, and reappears whenever immunity drops, stress occurs, nights are poorly slept, or anything weakens your defenses. And when it returns, it comes back aggressive. Wounds, pain, burning, discomfort. A single active episode is enough to transmit, even if the lesion is small, discreet, or almost imperceptible. And there is another detail that people completely ignore. The virus can be transmitted even without the presence of sores. The patient thinks they are clean because they see nothing, but the virus is there, ready to be passed on. And since oral sex involves direct contact with extremely sensitive mucous membranes, mouth, tongue, urethra, glands, transmission becomes almost inevitable when the virus is active. That's why I always tell my patients, in the case of herpes, what transmits is not just what you see. It's mainly what you don't see. Now, there's another thing that many people don't imagine has a relation to oral sex: candidiasis. Many people think that candidiasis is something exclusively genital, but it is not. The mouth can also carry this fungus, and it can be transmitted directly and easily during oral sex. Candida, which is the name of this fungus, naturally lives in our body. The problem is not its existence, but it appearing where it shouldn't. And when it enters the urethra, for example, it can cause quite uncomfortable inflammation, itching, burning, peeling, redness, a condition that often the patient confuses with allergy, soap irritation, heat, and goes weeks without knowing what it is. And there is a detail that almost no one talks about. Candidiasis takes advantage of low immunity. Stressed people, those using antibiotics repeatedly, with poor sleep or weakened defenses, become much more vulnerable. Yes, we already have studies showing that Candida appears in a considerable portion of urethritis cases that are not related to gonorrhea. In other words, many cause-unknown inflammations may actually originate from oral sex. And the most insidious part of this story is that the fungus rarely shows signs in the mouth. The person transmitting it feels nothing. No itching, no burning, no discomfort, but still passes it on. That's why I tell my patients, candidiasis is not just a problem for those with visible lesions. It is a problem for those who receive the fungus in the wrong place. And now I need to warn you about something many people think has been left in the past, but which is more present than ever today: syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. These diseases have not disappeared. On the contrary, they have returned strongly precisely because of risky habits and the false idea that oral sex is safe. Syphilis, for example, can start with a single sore, a small, discrete sore that appears in the mouth or on the penis. And often the patient thinks it is a canker sore, an irritation, something insignificant. But this single sore is already enough to transmit the bacteria. Gonorrhea and chlamydia have an even more treacherous behavior. They can colonize the throat without causing any symptoms. The person lives normally, eats, talks, spends the day without noticing anything at all, and still transmits the infection through oral sex. And the most surprising detail for many people is this: we already know that a significant part of throat gonorrhea cases occur in people who have never had genital penetration, only oral sex. That alone already shows the extent of the risk. And when these bacteria descend to the urethra, they cause urethritis, burning, discharge, pain when urinating, discomfort, sometimes so intense that the patient thinks they have a common urinary infection, but they do not. And the worst part is that since the contamination was through oral sex, the person doesn't even imagine where it came from. They go weeks without understanding what happened, without even thinking for a second that the origin was exactly there, in the partner's or partneress's throat. That's why I always tell my patients, these infections are not from the past. They are here, now, circulating, transmitted silently. And oral sex is one of the most underestimated entry points that exist. And now comes one of the most neglected points when we talk about oral sex. Something that, honestly, most people have never heard of. Bacterial urethritis caused by common mouth bacteria. The urethra, both in men and women, is an environment that should be sterile. It was not made to receive the type of bacteria that naturally live in the oral cavity, and that's exactly what makes this problem so serious. Bacteria such as Streptococcus, Haemophilus, and others that normally coexist in saliva can migrate to the urethra during oral sex. And when this happens, they cause a silent, persistent inflammation, extremely uncomfortable, and worse, very difficult to diagnose. The patient begins to feel a burning sensation, a discrete burning when urinating, a strange discomfort. Sometimes a slight discharge appears, other times nothing appears. They undergo tests for chlamydia, gonorrhea, all negative, and then begins that saga, changing antibiotics, switching medication, repeating tests. Nothing improves, because no one looks at the source point. This chronic urethral inflammation can last weeks or months when the bacteria come from the mouth. And since there is no simple test that easily identifies this type of contamination, many patients are lost, not understanding where the problem came from. And here is the most treacherous detail. The person transmitting almost never feels anything. She may have pharyngitis, may have used antibiotics recently, may have a completely unbalanced oral flora, and still not notice any change. But she transmits. And that's why I always tell my patients, when the urethra inflames without an apparent cause, when tests come back negative and discomfort persists, the silent culprit is often that oral sex, which seemed too safe to cause any problem. And this is where many people finally understand there is no completely risk-free oral sex. Now that you understand the risks, let me explain very clearly what I tell all my patients when it comes to oral sex and intimate health. The first thing is very simple, but many people ignore. You need to evaluate who you are relating to. Oral sex with multiple partners, casual sex, circumstantial sex, with people whose health you completely do not know. This increases the risk of transmitting all those infections we have discussed so far. I know that many people do not like to hear this, but there is no truly healthy sexual life when there is frequent risky behavior. It is important to be responsible, know who your partner is, observe signs, understand the history. This makes more difference than any medicine. Another fundamental thing, do not ignore lesions. Recurrent canker sores, wounds, warts, small sores in the mouth, lips, tongue, gums, penis, vulva. Any change deserves attention. Never engage in intimate contact if you or your partner have any wound, even if it seems small or silly. This is exactly how many of the viruses and bacteria we mentioned are transmitted. And if you have already engaged in any risky behavior, use a condom. Yes, it significantly reduces the transmission of many of these diseases, including during oral sex. And I cannot fail to emphasize something essential: the HPV vaccine. It is safe, effective, and can prevent more than 90% of cancers associated with the virus. It is one of the few tools that truly can block the transmission of one of the most dangerous risks we discussed here. In the end, my role as a doctor is not to tell you what you should or should not do in your intimate life. It is to give you complete, truthful, and scientific information so that you can make a conscious and truly safe decision. So after everything we discussed, I want you to take one very clear message from here. Oral sex is not the safe, light, or harmless practice that many people imagine. It transmits viruses, bacteria, and fungi that can remain silent for months or years. And when they appear, the damage is already done. Herpes, syphilis, gonorrhea, candidiasis, chlamydia, HPV, urethritis that no one discovers. All of this happens to people who have no idea where they caught it, and most are surprised when they realize that the source was right there: oral sex. And that's why I need to ask you something now, not as internet content, but as medical advice. If you know someone who still believes that oral sex is too safe to cause problems, share this video with that person. Believe me, a simple piece of information like this can prevent years of suffering, delayed diagnoses, and even serious diseases. A big hug, and see you in the next video.